Alright, let's look at what a quadratic equation looks like. Here it is right here. It starts with a variable x to the squared power, the second power. And that's a quadratic equation. And let's take also here what a quadratic puzzle box looks like. So, quadratic puzzle box, you multiply on top and you add on the bottom. So let's look at how that works. Okay, so let's look at our first box. We got our two sides already, and we're going to multiply on the top, and you get 5 times 2, and that's 10. And on the bottom, we're going to add. So 5 plus 2, and that gives us 7. Okay, so let's try again with another one. To get the top, multiply. And to get the bottom, 2 plus 3, and we're going to add. Okay, one more time. Remember what to do. Top, multiply. And bottom is going to be add. Okay, so you try some and you get used to doing it and you see what kind of numbers you get. And so pause your video for a second, work out the problems, and then we'll check a couple answers. Okay, so let's check a couple answers. And did you get what we got? Check and see. Multiply on the top, add on the bottom. All right, let's go to the next one. Okay, on this one here, multiply to the top, add on the bottom. Okay, this time we get negative numbers. So positive times a negative is a negative. So we're going to multiply a negative number times a positive number, and we end up with a negative number. 2 times 3 is 6. And on the bottom, we're going to add them together. And which one's the bigger? The negative number. So you're going to end up with a negative answer because negative 3 is bigger than 2. So negative 3 plus 2, and you get a negative 1. Okay, let's try another one. On the top, I'll multiply negative times a positive, and that gives us a negative. And on the bottom, which number is bigger, the negative number or the positive number? And we're going to add them together. Positive number is the bigger number, the negative number is smaller, so our answer is going to be positive, and it's a positive 1. Okay, we'll try it again. And on the top, and multiply. Negative times positive is negative. On the bottom, we add. And 7 is bigger than 1, so 7 take away 1 is 6. Okay, so ready to go again? You try it out. Get a bunch of them done. Pause the video while you do them. And then we'll look at a couple of the answers. Ready, ready, ready? Okay, so we added on the bottom and we multiplied on the top. And check your answers. See if you got what we got. Negative times positive is negative. And when you add a negative number and a positive number, the bigger number, negative, then the answer is negative. Okay, here we go again. Notice this time we got 2 negative numbers. Multiply on the top, add on the bottom. So negative times negative, negative 6 times negative 3, negative times negative is going to be positive. So you end up with 18. Now on the bottom, we're going to add a negative 6 and a negative 3 added together. And I notice both numbers are negative. So you add some negatives, put in some more negatives, you just end up with a bigger negative. So we have 6 negatives, we have 3 negatives, we put them together, you end up with 9 negatives. You add them together, they don't change signs, they just heap together. Okay, let's try another one. Negative 1 and a negative 2. So multiply, negative times negative, and what do you get? A positive. And when you add them together, you get some negatives, put in more negatives, and you end up with just a bigger negative. One more time. Negative times negative. 4 times 5 is 20. Negative times negative is positive. And when you add them together, you have 5 negatives. Add to it 4 negatives. How many negatives do you have altogether? You've got 9 negatives. Okay, here's some more for you to try out. See if you can get them all right. And pause the video, and then we'll check out some of the answers. Okay, look that over. See if you ended up with the same thing we ended up with. Okay, let's go to another one. Here we go. Now notice this time we got the top and the bottom. We're trying to find the side. So this is where it starts to get tricky, and this is where you got to be a little bit inventive. And this is what we're really trying to learn how to do, is how do you get the sides. Okay, so now you know kind of what to expect, because you've seen a bunch of examples of multiplying things together and adding them together. Okay, so what could you possibly multiply together to get to a 3? Well, there's really only one way to get to a 3. So 1 times 3. So how do you get to a 4? Well, does 1 plus 3 equal to 4? Yes, it does. So, okay, so our side numbers had to have been 1 and 3, because 1 times 3 was 3 on the top, and 1 plus 3 was 4 on the bottom. Okay, let's look at another one. Okay, what could our side numbers be on this one? What could you possibly multiply together to get to 7? Well, really, there's really only one way to get to 7, so it's got to be 1 times 7. Okay, so hopefully it works out that 1 plus 7 is, in fact, 8, and it is. Good. Well, then our side numbers had to have been 1 and 7. Okay, let's try another one. Okay, 6 and 5. Well, notice that with 6, there is more than one way to get to 6. You could multiply 2 times 3. You could multiply 1 times 6. You've got 2 different ways to get there. So which one is it? Well, 1 times 6 gives you 6. That's true. But then when you do 1 plus 6, nope, wrong answer. So 1 plus 6 was 7, not 5. Okay, how about 2 plus 3? 2 times 3. 2 times 3 gives you the 6 at the top when you multiply, and 2 plus 3 gives you 5. So 2 and 3 are our winners. 2 times 3 and 2 plus 3. Okay, so this is where you get to try some out, just like this. Yeah, it's a little more tricky. You got to use a little inventiveness here. So let's look at some problems. And remember, you're multiplying to get to the top, and you're adding to get to the bottom. So here they are. And see if you can figure them all out. They're puzzle boxes. That's why they call them puzzle boxes. You got a puzzle on them. So pause the video for a minute, get all these done, and then we'll check a couple of the answers and see if we got what you got. Okay, let's look at a couple of the answers. And did it come out the way you expected it to? Okay, let's try another one. Okay, get a little harder this time, right? Negative numbers. Okay, and again, it's puzzling. We're going to have to use ingenuity and figure it out. What could you possibly multiply together to get to a negative 9? Well, first off, negative 9, a number times a number equals negative 9. There's only one way to get there. A positive number times a negative number. It has to be. So one of your numbers has to be negative, and one of the numbers has to be positive. We're multiplying on the top, and we're adding on the bottom. So one side's negative, the other side's got to be positive. Otherwise, you couldn't have negative 9. So think about, how would you get to 9? What's the possible ways to get to 9? Well, there's 2 ways to get there. It's either 1 times 9 or it's 3 times 3. And remember, one of those numbers has to be negative and the other has to be positive, because if it was negative and you multiply them together, you wouldn't end up with a negative 9. You get a positive. So it has to be one negative, one positive. So which one is it? Well, if you do 1 times negative 9, you get negative 9. That's true. But what happens when you do 1 plus negative 9? Well, which one's bigger? You get more negatives than positives. You got 9 negatives, only 1 positive. So you end up with a negative 8. Well, that's wrong. So, because you got an 8 on the bottom, not a negative 8. Okay, so we're going to have to try something else. So let's think about negative 1 and positive 9. Well, negative 1 times positive 9 is in fact negative 9. So that's right on the top. But what on the bottom? Well, 9 minus 1. Well, 9 minus 1 is 8. So that worked out okay. So it's negative 1 times 9 on the top and 9 minus 1 on the bottom. So our 2 numbers are 9 and -1. Okay, let's try another one. -6 on the top and 5 on the bottom. Okay, same thing over again. It's got to be one positive and one negative. How come? Because to get to -6, and you multiply two numbers together, one of them has to be a negative number, and the other one has to be a positive number. Because if it was negative times negative, you'd get a positive on top, and that's not right. So one has to be negative, and the other has to be positive. So what's all the different ways you can get to 6? Well, 2 times 3 will give you 6, and one of them had to be negative, and one of them had to be positive. So what happens when you add those two numbers together? A +2 and a -3. Well, unfortunately, you got more negatives than positives. You got 3 negatives and 2 positives. So when you add those together, you end up with a -1. And that's not what you're looking for on the bottom. You're looking for a 5. So that's completely off. Okay, let's try another one. A -1 and a +6. Okay, well, negative times positive gives you a -6 on the top. Well, how about when you add them? 6 take away 1 is in fact 5. So there's your winner right there. And our two numbers is a +6 and a -1. Okay, here we go again. Different ways to get to 8. Well, it could be 2 times 4. It could be 1 times 8. But then you know one of them's going to be negative and one has to be positive. So which one's which? Well, let's try some of them. Let's do a -4 and a +2. Well, that will in fact give you a -8 on the top when you multiply them. But how about on the bottom? If you add them together, you got more negatives than positives. You got 4 negatives and 2 positives. You're adding them together, 2 minus 4. That gives you a -2. So that's not what you want on the bottom. You want a +2 on the bottom. So that's not right. So we have to try something else. So let's try -2 and +4. Well, that gives you the right answer on the top. 2 times 4 is 8, and negative times positive gives you negative. So -8 on the top, that's right. And what about when you add them? 4 minus 2 is in fact 2. So we got a winner. And our two numbers are 4 and -2. Okay, so now's the moment. You're going to try this out for yourself. Here's a bunch of them. They're tricky because we've got negative numbers in them. And you got to use a little ingenuity to figure out what it had to be. So pause the video, think them all over, get your answers, write them down, and then we'll look at a couple of the answers. All right, let's see if we got what you got. All right, let's try another one. Okay, now notice this time, same thing, puzzle boxes. You have a positive number on the top and a negative number on the bottom. Okay, now in this situation, you could not have a negative number on the bottom, unless at least one of your two side numbers is a negative number. Because if you think about it, you add two numbers together, if they're both positive, you can't possibly get a negative number on the bottom. So at least one of the side numbers had to have been negative. But then on the top, you got a positive. So if you think about that, if you multiply the two numbers together and only one of them was negative, you would end up with a negative on the top. So you can kind of see by reasoning that the side numbers have to both be negative, because it's the only way you could have got a positive to the top and a negative to the bottom. So let's try it out and see what you think. What are all the ways you can multiply to get to 12? And knowing that they're both going to have to be negative. It's going to have to be two negative numbers. So we multiply to 12. We add a -8. Different ways to get to 12. 1 times 12. 2 times 6. 3 times 4. We already know both numbers are negative. So that makes it a little easier. Because negative times negative gives you a positive on the top. We know at least one had to have been a negative. You couldn't have got a negative on the bottom. So it got to both be negative. Well, let's try one. We'll do -3 and -4. Well, 3 times 4 gives you the 12, and negative times negative gives you the positive. But what happens when you add those two numbers together? You get a -8, which is what you need on the bottom. And no, you don't, because a -3 added with a -4 just gives you a bigger negative. It's 3 plus 4, it's 7 negatives. So that's not -8. So that's not it. So let's try a different one. Negative times negative, negative 6 times negative 2 gives you positive 12 on the top. So that's right. And what about when you add them? Well, you get some negatives. You add in some more negatives. You end up with a great big negative. And what is the big negative? It's negative 8. So we got a winner. And our two side numbers then are negative 2 and negative 6. Okay, here we go again. Same thing. We got a positive on the top and a negative on the bottom. So when you see that configuration, you know it has to be a negative and a negative, right? Because it's the only way you could have got a positive on the top. And so how do you get to 6? Well, 1 times 6 and 2 times 3. That's really your only choices. So let's try 2 times 3. Both of them negative because we already knew it had to be negative times negative. And when you add a negative 3 and a negative 2, well, you don't get 7 because 2 plus 3 is 5. And they're both negatives, so it would be a negative 5. That's not the bottom. The bottom's a negative 7. So let's try something else. We'll do a negative 1 and a negative 6. So negative times negative is positive, 6 on the top. And when you add them together, a negative and a negative gives you a bigger negative, and it is in fact a negative 7. So we have a winner. And our two numbers are a negative 6 and a negative 1. All right, here we go again. 8 on the top, negative 6 on the bottom. So what could you possibly multiply to get to 8? Well, 2 and 4, and 1 and 8. Those are pretty much your only choices. We know it's going to be negative and negative because you couldn't have got a positive on the top otherwise. So let's do it. Negative times negative gives you a positive 8. And when you add them together, nope, negative 1. And then add that to a negative 8 and you end up with a negative 9. So that's not the right number for the bottom. So let's try a different one. 2 and 4 gives you your 8. Negative times negative is positive. And a negative 2 added with a negative 4 gives you an even bigger negative, which is a negative 6. And that's our winner. So our answer, a negative 2 and a negative 4. All right, let's try it again. Get a bunch of them done and pause the video and write all your answers down, and then we'll check them and see a couple of them are right. Okay, so let's check the ones that we did here. See if you got the same answer we got. And okay, so here we go again. Okay, notice that on this one, we got a positive on the top and a positive on the bottom. Well, if you get a positive on the top and also a positive on the bottom, there's really only one way to do that. They got to both be positive. Because if one of them was negative, then the top number would be negative for sure. And if both of them were negative, then the bottom one would be negative for sure. And so the fact that the top and the bottom are both positive numbers means that you have to have two side numbers that are positive. So you know that. It's your big hint. So the ingenuity is much easier because you know that you have to be working with two positive numbers. So anyway, the ways you can multiply to get to 9. 1 times 9, 3 times 3. Those are your only choices. So let's try one out. 1 and 9. And 1 plus 9, unfortunately, is 10. So that's the wrong number on the bottom. So let's try a different one. 3 times 3, that gives you your 9 on the top. And 3 plus 3, there's your winner. It gives you a 6 on the bottom. So 3 times 3 is 9. 3 plus 3 is 6. And we have 3 and 3 as our side numbers. Okay, another puzzle box. 4 on the top and 4 on the bottom. Again, they're both positive. Top's positive, bottom's positive. That means the sides have to be positive too. There's no other way. So, because remember, if one side was negative, the top would have to be negative, and both sides were negative, then the top could be positive, but the bottom would have to be negative. So it can't be anything other than two positive numbers. So let's go multiply. 1 and 4 gives you 4. Unfortunately, 1 plus 4 does not give you 4, so that can't be right. So let's try a different one. 2 times 2 gives you 4 on the top, and 2 plus 2 gives you the 4 on the bottom. So there's your winner. and our number is 2 and 2. Okay, let's try another one. Multiply to get to 8. So again, positive top, positive bottom, so the sides have to be positive too. Different ways to multiply to 8, 1 and 8, 2 and 4, that's pretty much your only choices. 1 times 8 does equal to 8, but 1 plus 8 is not equal to 6, so you got to try something else. 2 and 4 equals to 8, and fortunately 2 plus 4 equals to 6. So that's your winner for the top and the bottom. So your side has to be 2 and 4. All right, let's try some more and give it a try. Zip them out, pause your video, and then we'll look at a couple answers. Okay, let's have a look at a couple answers. See if you got what we got. Okay, I hope you did well on all of this, and this is the end for this video. Thank you very much for your time.